Today, I'm here to talk to you about risk mindset and what this means in terms of the way that commercial specialists set up, negotiate, and manage contracts. I'll describe the distinction between risk mindset and risk management and risk analysis. Now, a good place to start here is a publication on the website of the UK Cabinet Office, which describes the people standards, the professional standards expected of those people, those commercial people who negotiate and manage contracts. And these standards were originally set in place in 2016, and within them they describe a range of behaviours, a sense of what good looks like in senior commercial staff. And within them there are a series of important statements, and these include everything from an ability to challenge overly risk-averse behaviour amongst stakeholders and others in the organisation, as well as being in a position and a willingness to take on calculated risks in the pursuit of either greater efficiency or more value for money over the longer term. And this mindset, this way of working, is then reflected in a range of attributes which are seen as being important in senior commercial staff. The question is, to what extent do you as an individual find yourself able to regularly demonstrate these behaviours when in reality there's the constant pressure of the necessary processes and procedures and meetings all required of you by your organisation that may squeeze out the time necessary for you to develop a personal and deep understanding of the risks faced by a project or contract, and therefore an ability both to explain these more thoroughly to others, but also act on them earlier than otherwise might be the case. This allows the commercial specialist to take account of a range of risks that might affect a deal, and from all the information available, distill important insights, which ultimately directly affect decisions that can be taken. So let's consider for a moment the differences between risk management and analysis and risk mindset. In practice, risk management is often limited to the preparation of risk analyses, the completion of risk logs, and a fairly mechanical approach to identifying the top risks in a project. The risk log might be revisited periodically, but the whole approach adopted is one of treating the management of risk as a matter of hygiene rather than behaviours and leadership. And let's break this down a little bit more. Risk analysis is a set of tools that you would apply to streams of information and data. Good analysis includes succinct illustrations of risks which are relevant to a particular contract or project and take account of probabilities and the quantification of their potential impact, both pre and post mitigation. For example, completing a qualitative risk assessment of a contract and constructing a set of risk mitigation options falls under the heading of risk analysis. Adopting a management style that combines this sort of analysis with a willingness to follow up on almost instinctive concerns and sometimes quite subtle leading indicators is part of demonstrating a risk mindset. The message here is that there's little point in having excellent analysis of risk if your team either doesn't act on it or makes wrong decisions as to what to prioritize. So, when a commercial specialist is demonstrating a risk mindset, it can affect things at a pretty fundamental level. At its simplest, a senior manager can find his or her time determined and driven by processes, procedures, and agendas set by others. But alternatively, that senior manager can flex how his or her time and resource is allocated based on a continuing assessment of evolving risks. And one way that I ask people to consider this so that they can begin to draw their own views as to whether they're adopting enough of a risk mindset on a day-to-day basis is to test a couple of things. First, start by looking back over your calendar over the last month. Then look at what it says in terms of the various meetings that you've had, the reports that you've read, the material that you've developed, and try to estimate the number of hours, the amount of time that you've spent specifically on considering the top 3 risks that relate to your contract or project, and the time that you've taken then to deepen your understanding of those risks in order to take actual decisions that stem from this deepened understanding of those risks. Has half of your time been spent doing this? Has it been a few hours? Or have the demands of your role resulted in you relying on others to develop this deep understanding, and with you trusting that they will get this right and flag matters with you at the right time? Also, for clarity here, when I talk about risks and when I talk about risk mindset, this includes both managing downside risks but also seeking the upside potential. In other words, the scope for benefits over and above whatever was the original business case for putting the contract in place in the first place. Now, personally, I use the terms both downside risk and upside risk, with the latter term being borrowed from the world of financial investment. For me, this emphasizes that often defending against the downside and seeking the upside are two sides of the same coin. To elaborate, if you see the potential for gains over and above the benefits originally planned for in the contract, such as perhaps adding more functionality or changing the means of service delivery to substantially reduce costs, if you see that potential, then you obviously have to also take and consider the attendant risks that go with pursuing that potential. There are very few changes that you could implement to seek improvements without taking, at least for a short period of time, some additional downside risk. There's also the challenge of splitting scarce time and resource between the management of downside risk and the pursuit of upside potential. An hour spent on one means an hour less spent on the other. A risk mindset is needed to strike the right balance. Secondly, consider the way that you set up your team to engage with and deal with risk. A very specific example of this is simply consider the agendas that you have set for key team meetings, project boards, and contract boards. Look at where risk-related decisions are placed in the agenda. Are key risks being reviewed immediately after you've read out the minutes from the previous meeting? Or is this something that is tacked on towards the end of the meeting? My experience is that in too many cases, perhaps in most, the consideration of key risks is typically tacked on at the end, and often in a fairly mechanical way. So in short, ask yourself, is a deep understanding of key risks and a determination to act on them central to the way that you organise your own time and manage others? I've certainly been guilty in the past of allowing a bow wave of meetings and other activities to get in the way of spending enough time on and resource on properly understanding risks and acting on them early. So to recap, assess how much time you personally take to analyse and understanding the key risks faced under your contract. Then consider how much time you take to follow through on managing the downside and seeking the upside. Then consider the extent to which your team is encouraged and allowed to demonstrate a risk mindset themselves. If you get this right, you'll create space to consider where the upside potential can be found and what needs to be done to allow it to be exploited and taken forward. You will also ensure that you're actively considering the downside risks and minimize the chance that they catch you unawares. So that's the difference between risk mindset, risk management, and analysis. Clearly they're related. It's very difficult to adopt a good risk mindset without having good risk management tools and analysis available to you. But what you need to do is guard against the tendency that assumes that risk analysis is sufficient, and thus you end up not doing enough to make sure that your own personal behaviours are driven by a deep understanding of risk and a determination to minimise the downside and seek the upside. So thanks very much for your attention. I hope you found this talk about risk mindset useful. I hope it's something that you can apply in your everyday working life, and I hope to see you in the future. Thank you very much.